Greetings again and welcome to Introduction to Astrology. I'm your host, the Professor. Today we're going to be talking about the astrological planet, the moon. And of course, the moon in modern science is considered to be a natural satellite of the Earth. But using the ancient definition of planet as wanderer, planet as anything that has an influence on the Earth and wanders against an apparent fixed background of stars, in this ancient definition, the moon is an astrological planet. To jump forward, though, to modern science, it was believed that the moon was formed from a collision with the proto-Earth about 4.51 billion years ago. And the gouge that we know as Mariana's Trench, where the deepest part of the ocean was very likely where the moon was. And it's believed to be the case because soil samples from the moon actually mimic and are very, very close to the substances that are found in the Earth's crust. So it's very likely that there was some kind of collision about 4.51 billion years ago, and this is what formed the moon. Now, the moon and the Earth are close companions and are considered to be close astrologically. And Venus, as well, is a close astrological cousin of the moon. These all represent the mother goddess, okay, and the divine feminine. The moon really represents the mother goddess. And in Lascaux, France, there, of course, was found the worship idol, the mother goddess, who was holding a horn. And one hand was holding the horn, the other hand was touching the genitals. And there were 13 marks in that horn. And this was the first indication that ancient peoples were making a connection between the cycles of the moon and the menstrual cycles that are experienced by a woman. Of course, the moon has different phases, just as the woman's life has different phases. And Robert Graves identifies this in The White Goddess. That is, the virgin, the mother, and the crone are the three major phases of womanhood: pre-motherhood, motherhood, and post-motherhood. And each one has its own correspondence, if you will, in its understanding. Astrologically, the moon rules the sign Cancer and is considered to be feminine in its character. Just like the sun is always considered to be masculine, the moon is always considered to be feminine in its character. And it represents, unlike the sun representing the conscious world, the moon represents our unconscious urges, those things that we kind of take for granted in terms of habit, disposition, the things that we do daily in sort of an unconscious way are considered to be lunar in their character. And so the moon has an orbital period of about 27.3 days, which is roughly around 28 days, of course, corresponding in ancient times to the menstrual cycle of the woman. Now, modern artificial lighting has screwed up a lot of those natural cycles, and of course, women living in proximity to each other and also population has altered those cycles as well. But in ancient times, this was a sacred connection, you could say, between this astrological body and the physical body. As a matter of fact, if people have any doubts as to whether astrology is true, I think I would urge them to look at that basic connection between that planetary period and the menstrual cycle itself. So going beyond that, though, in astrology, the moon represents disposition and our habits and our unconscious mind. And so the seat of habit is really what the moon has to do with. And so those things that are repetitive, that we do every single day, that become a part of who we are, really what the moon has to do with on a natural basis. So to look beyond this basic correspondence, there are, of course, the dignities and debilities of the moon. And the exaltation of the moon is Taurus. And Taurus has to do with the material and sensible world, that world which is available to the senses. And if the moon rules our moods, if it has to do with our emotions, if it has to do with our disposition, these things are highly altered by the sensory world. Just observe a couple who are out dressed beautifully, having a wonderful dinner, wine, fine food in a beautiful atmosphere, and you will be witness to this influence of La Bella Luna, the beautiful moon, of course. And one of my favorite movies, of course, is this Moonstruck, which really epitomizes the energy of the moon, and is a classic starring Cher and Nicolas Cage. So I encourage you to watch that if you really want to understand the notion of the moon. The moon is not rational. It has to do with our irrational urges, and these are very important. They were identified by Nietzsche, actually, as worthy of study for many years in psychology and traditional academia. They wanted to suppress and not study the emotional world or the unconscious world. And in modern times, thinkers like Freud and Nietzsche really wanted to bring to the surface these unconscious urges and drives, and to entertain revival that was an acceptance of these ancient drives by people like the Greeks and those before them. So, exalted in the sign of Taurus, it's dignified in the sign of Cancer. And so the moon has to do with motherhood and caring for another. And so Cancer is the sign of the mother, and so it's a strong and natural position for this particular planet. That is, the person usually is very caring, looking after the children, being a good parent, offering care when necessary, keeping the child safe. Somebody who has these really natural maternal instincts is really someone who understands the energy of the moon. Now, the moon is in detriment in the sign of Capricorn, which means that, unlike Cancer, Capricorn doesn't have to do with the private or domestic world. It has to do with the public realm. And so the emotions are suppressed in this situation. They're not wanting to share the emotions and have that emotion be available to others. And so often the person will seek retreat. There was, of course, the god Pan, who's very close to Capricorn. And Pan often was hiding out because he didn't want to deal with the grief of being in public with his emotion, and often would let out this earth-curdling scream that would cause what was known as panic. And so often solitary drug use or solitary drinking or not making your emotions available or hiding is really a pattern with the moon in Capricorn. The moon in fall is in Scorpio. If Scorpio is the manipulator of energy, the magician, if you will, and the moon represents our emotions, then this is the emotional manipulator, the person who has a lot of people on the hook or is keeping people subservient or dependent on them. And so this is not a strong placement for the moon. It has a very subtle yet dark influence that is associated with black magic in ancient times. Hecate would be the Greek correspondence, of course. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about literature and mythology, of course, and the moon is associated with the metal silver. And the idea of lycanthropy, or the werewolf, or the person who changes when the moon comes out, and the silver bullet being the one that kills the werewolf, is all in line with the correspondence of this particular planet. It's the idea that every one of us has kind of a Jekyll and Hyde, if you will, and that the moon can sometimes, in its dark aspect, represent these dark emotions that get pent up and they come out all at once. If we move to a more positive correspondence, of course, we talked about the mother goddess, but also in Greek mythology, Selene, which was the goddess of the moon, and she could be seen in her chariot going across the sky. Also Artemis, who was the sister of the sun god Apollo, and was considered to be the huntress. Okay, so she would go out in the middle of the night and do the hunting at night, but also had this irrational nature to herself. There's a story, of course, of the hunter who was watching her bathe in the middle of the night, and he was out with his hounds, and she discovered him watching her bathe, and then turned him into a stag, and his own hounds hunted him down and killed him. Okay, so kind of a dark story, but was in alignment with this notion of the unconscious and the power and dynamism of the unconscious. The moon, of course, rules the tides and the tides of life. And in the teachings of Thoth Hermes Trismegistus, astrology is associated with the moon because astrology has to do with the tides of our experience. And so even if we're not talking about the astrological planet, the moon, we're still talking about that which swings us around in the stage of the world. And so this represents the tides of life. But of course, science tells us that the moon indeed rules the tides and causes the tides to go up and down, of course. It's rumored, too, that the full moon also has an effect on human beings. If we are 80 plus percent water in our bodies, of course, the moon's going to have an influence on our moods. And a lot of times, if you talk to anybody who works in an ER, it seems like all the crazies come out during the full moon. So also in the tarot, the moon is represented by the high priestess. And the high priestess is a frustrating card in the tarot in the sense that sometimes the high priestess will tell you the answer. Sometimes the high priestess will not. It's the idea of the veil of Isis. That is, sometimes the moon shows her face, sometimes she does not. And so some things are made known to us and are available to our knowledge. Some things are kept in the realm of the unconscious or in the realm of mystery because they're not meant to be known, or if they were known, we would not brave the adventure. All right, so this is a general discussion, of course, of the aspects of what is known as the astrological planet, the moon. Thank you again for joining in, and we will forge ahead with some other planets, the next one being Mercury. And thank you again for your viewership and donations. And, of course, be the change you wish to see in the world. So long.